When you have NATO, who just finished their NATO summit in The Hague, making some really strange comments about NATO admission for Ukraine is still on the table, even though Trump has said it was not. There is a cost to that. Here's how Putin started that one.
It all started with the fact that we were lied to, that we were deceived, that we were swindled about the NATO enlargement to the east, because the entire world is aware that Russia received promises that not an inch eastward. NATO is not going to enlarge to the east. Then one wave of enlargement, the second wave of enlargement. And we keep saying that security of one country or of a group of countries cannot be ensured at the expense of any other states. And there are documents signed to this tune. And then they kept expanding, and we were told, well, you should not be concerned, you should not be afraid, it's not a threat to you. And when we said that we do believe it's a threat to us, then they did not say anything in response. They just told us to go far away with our opinions. No one wanted to listen to our opinions, but we know better what is a threat to us. It's our right to define what's a threat to us and how big the threat is from one side or from the other side. But no one was listening to us, and they kept on acting like that. Isn't that an aggressive behavior? Because that's exactly what aggressive behavior means, and the West doesn't want to notice this.
Yeah, and let me explain to you why that I put that clip up there. And what the West doesn't want to understand, because here's what the West is saying. This is two clips, and Gary, if you could just play these two back to back. You had Mark Rutte talking about how NATO is still on the table for Ukraine, and then he clarified that a couple of days later, where he was even more explicit. Watch this.
All of this brings Ukraine closer to NATO. It is building the bridge, and it means that you can count on us now and in the future. So that you can defend yourself, that you are stronger at the negotiating table, that you can deter aggression in the future, and on your irreversible path into NATO. We support you now and throughout the challenges ahead. No one deserves peace more than Ukraine.
You know, from the last Washington summit, I think it was 60 pages, 19 paragraphs. It will be considerably more condensed than that. And that means that you do not always have to repeat every sentence and every previous made commitment, because it stands. The strategic concept stands. The Washington communique stands. So the irreversible path of Ukraine into NATO is there, and it is my assumption that it is still there after the summit. Whether it is again in the communique or not, I think that's not relevant, because all the language we previously agreed on is there.
So come on, man. I mean, Putin is sitting there telling you, we went into Ukraine in 2022 because NATO was coming into Ukraine and you wouldn't take it off the table. And now then 3.5 years later, you're still saying that Ukraine is going to be. What choice or what options are we putting in the Russians' hands right now?
No, Russia has conceded that its only real option now is to militarily defeat Ukraine, and by transfer also defeat NATO. You know, Ukraine has been a de facto member of NATO since 1995, 1997. The only thing they didn't have was an Article 5 guarantee, and they didn't have to pony up 5% of their budget every year to kick into the NATO money pot. Otherwise, though, been full participant in exercises. And NATO has actually had a base at Yavoriv, which is out in western Ukraine, and it was a NATO headquarters of sorts, sub headquarters. So, Russia was, as Scott Horton, in his book Provoked, that's what happened. They were provoked into this, and the United States would not put up with Russia or China forming a military alliance with Mexico or Canada and then conducting military exercises on our borders. Absolutely not. We wouldn't stand for it. We would view that as a direct threat to us. Yet we do that to Russia, and we were surprised when they respond and say, hey, I'm not going to do this. The way the war has turned over the last this week or over the weekend, you now have Russia Previously, Lavrov and Medvedev had, it was generally recognized they would tolerate Ukraine joining the European Union. Russia now has changed that position as of Friday. They said, nope, European Union is just an extension of NATO, and we will not accept or tolerate Ukraine becoming part of that. So that's off the table now. Russia is now in Dnipropetrovsk and in Sumy. And Vladimir Putin made it clear, wherever there is a Russian boot, that's our land. So they've now taken Dnipropetrovsk and they are taking Sumy. And they're going to continue.
Oblast, of course, as well.
Yeah. Kharkiv, Zaporizhia is already, that's already part of Russia under the vote, but they're going to finish consolidating control. Russia could very well be in Odessa and have control of Odessa by the end of the year.
Yeah, that's really saying a lot too, because that's yet another one. And in fact, you mentioned Sergei Lavrov. He also addressed some of these recent developments a couple of days ago.
Instead of directing the resources obtained through taxation to address the most urgent and worsening socioeconomic problems, this money is being spent on financing a war in Ukraine that is meaningless from the point of view of having any prospects or achievements. The Europeans, no matter how much they swagger or puff up in their declared goals, namely the strategic defeat of Russia, have already softened their expectations. At first, they started saying that Russia must not be allowed to win. Now they have realized that even that won't fly. Now they are already talking about an immediate ceasefire, but also saying, allegedly, that they will continue to arm Ukraine. Macron said that an immediate ceasefire is necessary without any conditions. And don't you dare hope that during the ceasefire we will stop supplying weapons to Ukraine. Fairly frank, cynical.
Yeah, and he's just pointing out there that you say all this stuff from a position of weakness, that we demand an immediate ceasefire that benefits us on the weak side. And by the way, we're going to continue to help Ukraine on the other side of that, in the middle of that. But yeah, we want you to do that. Let me ask you a question. Do you think that the Western leaders actually think that'll fly, that it'll actually work, and that somehow they can compel Russia to achieve a ceasefire that then they can exploit for their side? Or is it more cynical, to his word there, that they actually know Russia won't do that, but they just keep saying it? Of course, if you go down that path, then I can't finish that sentence. So that what? What is the play of the West here, Larry?
No, I think it's the former, because they did it with the Minsk I, Minsk II agreements. And you even had Hollande and Merkel, who were, the two of the main negotiators on the European side with that deal between Ukraine and the leaders of the Donbass. But they admitted it was just a ploy in order to give Ukraine time to build up militarily. And when you go back and look at the number of NATO military exercises and European command exercises over the course of 20 years, go back to starting in 2000, it was all about equipping the Ukrainian army to be a proxy NATO force for attacking Russia. And now they don't have a plan B here. I mean, the sensible plan would be to say, okay, we need to broker a peace deal with Russia, a genuine peace deal. We're going to back NATO away. We're going to move it off of Russia's doorstep. But they're not going to do that. There's too much money involved. There's too much financial control involved. They don't want to give that up.
Well, yeah, but hang on, sorry, because that may be the mentality that we don't want to give that up. But there's another economic issue at stake here that is definitely not working in Europe's favor and is working in Russia's favor, which Vladimir Putin seems very cognizant of and said it actually out loud. He's going to be talking here that, and if you can, on the backside of this, talk a little bit about the mentality, because whereas the West is focused on today and whatever's at the end of my notes, nose and not much further. Russia seems to be focused on the long-term issue here. And Putin just declared that, hey, if you want to go down like economic warfare paths, I can make that fight.
Now, look at what's happening in the Western countries. They keep burying Russia, but they're going to die themselves. They keep burying us, not noticing that they're dying out themselves. We have 4.3% GDP growth last year, and the year before that, 4.1. This year, to fight inflation, we're going to see a lower GDP, but across the Eurozone, it's 0.5% growth. In some of the largest economies in Europe, in Germany, in France, they're basically teetering on the brink of inflation.
Yeah, so talk to me a little bit about your understanding of the Russian viewpoint, the time frame mentality, and can the West out economic Putin?
No, and it's very simple. Russia is the only country in the world. I want to repeat that. The only country in the world that is self-sufficient. And what I mean by that is they can provide their own energy, they can provide their own food, they have all of the natural resources needed to produce whatever whether we're talking computer chips, they have rare earth minerals. They're not dependent on China like the United States is. The United States is dependent on China for magnets, rare earth minerals that are processed, because we don't have those on our own. We can't survive without those. But get to Europe. Let's list the natural resources of Europe. Short list. None. They don't have gas or oil of any consequence. They don't produce enough food to feed themselves. And the farmers, they're shrinking them as they go along. Their industrial base has disappeared. They can't even produce, as Mark Rutte conceded 3 months ago, that all of Europe and the United States combined cannot, in 1 year, they can't produce the same amount of artillery shells that the Russians are producing in 3 months. So Europe is it used to think of itself as a Rottweiler or a Great Dane, big dog. But it failed to look in the mirror. It's a old Mexican Chihuahua with lousy teeth. Okay, particularly the breath.
Holy cow! Where can this go, Larry? Because if Russia continues on, and if they conclude, as you just said, it appears that they are, which is, okay, you've left us no off-ramps anywhere. The only thing you've left to us is just to continue and complete the special military operation according to our destination and desires and standpoint. But I don't see any evidence that the other side, meaning the Western side and Ukraine side, can prevent that. So what is that? Where does this end up going then?
The West is going to try to provoke a war with Russia. They're already doing it up in the Baltic Sea. They've been confronting and trying to interfere with the movement of ships to and from Russia. There are reports that the Australians have now deployed 100 of their soldiers that are going to participate in training Ukrainians on drone operations and electronic warfare. They're reportedly in Odessa. At some point, Russia's going to hit them. I've also heard reports that there are Poles, French, and British officers as well, officers and enlisted. They're hoping that will trigger an event that will bring NATO, finally get NATO to stand up and say, okay, we're going to go fight Russia. It'll be insane. Russia's ready for that, and the West isn't. The West, particularly the United States, our entire military structure, we're not built to fight a land battle. We're not. We are.
But we're also not now equipped to fight a missile war either. So that ain't helping us out.
Yeah. So it is. I'm afraid that's where it's headed. The cooler heads. Maybe Trump ultimately, will follow through with his claims that he wants to have a good, peaceful relations with Putin. But again, Trump's been all over the board. It's like watching a gymnastics act at the Olympics. You know, all the backflips and somersaults. You know, from 1 minute he knows everything to the next minute he knows nothing. 1 minute he's great friends with Vladimir, and Putin. You know, Putin, to his credit, knows how to play Trump. I mean, at that same press conference that he gave there in Belarus, that Putin said some really nice things about Trump. Oh man, Trump was. Did you see all the nice things Putin said about me? Oh man, he's a great guy.
Yeah, that's the same. That's the same book that Mark Rutte is trying to play from too. Butter up Trump. But you know, I think that there may have been an additional comment. This is the last one here before I let you go. That Putin may have been signaling to Trump to say, "Hey, man, there's still a rational end to this for you," because unlike what so many, especially in the Great Britain, are trying to claim that Russia's coming for them next, and Lindsey Graham says, "Yeah, they're coming for us next." Putin said, "Hey, in terms of what's next, here's what's next."
Now, what we are planning to do is we're going to decrease our spending on defense in the next 3 years.
In the context there, that was a little bit shorter than I wanted, but he was saying that once the special military operation is done, our intention is to reduce our defense. Yeah. And then he went on specifically and said, it's just nonsense to think that we're going to be trying to go to war with NATO. Why would we do that? We have a plan not to, so we can take that off ramp there. Do you think we will?
No.
Oh,
I don't think. I don't think we will.
Yes, I was hoping you would say something.
I hope I'm wrong, but I've learned never to bet on being sensible and reasonable. You know,
that's a reasonable thing to do.
You know, we have a poor track record on that. But you know, what's fascinating, what Putin's saying there, he really believes that Russia's going to put an end to this war with Ukraine this year. Because he's saying we're planning now for 3 years out, we're going to reduce spending, because he sees the end. The end is in sight. They're seeing that now. So Russia's going to. I can't emphasize though how many people here in the United States believe that Russia's economy is collapsing, that they're in big trouble, that they're an authoritarian dictator. I mean, it's nonsense. And you can't even reason with these people, and I'm not talking about just Joe Blow at the who is unemployed and knows nothing. I'm talking about seemingly well-educated, successful people that believe that nonsense.
Because that's all they're ever told. That's all they ever hear. So it must be true.
Yeah. So
in the mainstream media,
Russia will continue to pursue its interests and secure its interests, and if we want to find a way to peacefully coexist with them, they're more than happy to. Hey, they'd rather get along. They'd rather we be friends. But they're not going to accept us, like with Israel, helping launch terrorist attacks inside Russia and trying to kill Vladimir Putin.
So let me ask you last question here, just kind of like a lightning round here. If we don't take this off ramp, and whether it's through a false flag or just an error or miscalculation or something stupid, and we end up getting into a clash, can Russia actually fight a war against us and not destroy its economy?
Yes. Yeah, they can. Again, the key is they are self-sufficient. We're not. And they have the industrial infrastructure in place. We don't. We've eviscerated ours. And, I think you heard my new favorite statistic is to build an F-35 takes 18 to 24 months. Whereas in World War II, when we built the B-24 Liberator bomber, we could put one of those together in 63 minutes, and it would be finished and ready to fly in 18 to 24 hours. We've gone from 18 to 24 hours to 18 to 24 months. But that's the reality.
Too.
That's the reality.
Yeah.
And Russia's still in a position where they can crank out stuff quickly.
Yeah. By the way, this was popped up there. I have heard various people say that it wasn't even real, or else others said no, he put it up there and then took it down. I don't really know, but we'll be watching it to see if Trump comes up with any big news today. I'm not sure what that meant, but we'll certainly keep an eye on that. But in the meantime, I really appreciate you coming on today, Larry. Always a pleasure, on especially these two really critical issues. Thanks for your time today.
Hey, thanks for having me. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks to you guys, and we will see you next time on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.